You have 2 daughters who call another man dad. 8 words that shattered a billionaire's world. But here's what makes this story devastating. He never knew those children existed. For 16 years, Cheryl Johnson raised twin girls alone, working double shifts, skipping meals, building a life from nothing. And the man whose bronze eyes stared back from her daughters' faces, he was about to marry someone else. Until the day those same daughters were chosen as flower girls for his wedding, and Cheryl opened the invitation to see his name. Cheryl Johnson's hands were elbow-deep in sudsy dishwater when her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't answer it. Phones always brought bad news, past due notices, shift changes, her landlord asking about rent 3 days early. Whatever it was could wait until she finished scrubbing marinara sauce off the twins' dinner plates. But the phone buzzed again, then again. "Mama," Lila's voice rang from the living room, bright and impatient. "Your phone's blowing up." Cheryl dried her hands on a faded dish towel and finally glanced at the screen. 7 missed calls, 12 text messages, all from the same number, Westbridge Community Church. Her stomach tightened. The last time Pastor Michaels called repeatedly, it was because Rose had accidentally locked herself in the church basement during choir practice. Before that, Lila had borrowed candles from the altar for a school art project without asking. Cheryl hit redial, bracing herself. "Cheryl!" Pastor Michael's voice practically vibrated through the speaker. "Oh, thank heavens. I've been trying to reach you for an hour. Is everything okay? Are the girls?" "The girls are perfect. Better than perfect. Cheryl, you're not going to believe this." Cheryl wedged the phone between her shoulder and ear, returning to the sink. "Try me. You know the Hartwell Sellers wedding next month?" Cheryl's hands stilled in the water. Sellers. That name hadn't crossed her mind in weeks, maybe months. She'd gotten good at burying it beneath grocery lists and school permission slips and the relentless rhythm of survival. "I've heard of it," she said carefully. Everyone in the city had heard of it. The wedding was being called the event of the decade-old money, marrying new power. Society pages breathless with speculation, venues booked 2 years in advance. Cheryl had made a point of not caring. "Well," Pastor Michaels continued, practically giddy, "the bride's family reached out to our church specifically. They want 2 children from our congregation to serve as flower girls. Cheryl, they chose Lila and Rose." The dish slipped from Cheryl's grip and clattered into the sink. "What?" "I know. Out of every child in the city, they picked your girls. Apparently, someone from the bride's family saw them perform at the spring recital and was absolutely enchanted. They want Lila and Rose to be part of the ceremony." Cheryl gripped the counter, her pulse hammering in her ears. "Pastor Michaels, I don't think that's a good idea." "Are you joking, Cheryl? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The exposure alone, the connections these families have, this could open doors for the girls' futures." Futures. Cheryl closed her eyes. She'd built those futures brick by brick. Every overtime shift, every skipped meal, every time she'd chosen pride over charity, independence over compromise. And now someone wanted to hand her daughters an opportunity wrapped in the one name that still made her chest ache. "Who exactly is getting married?" Cheryl asked, though she already knew. She needed to hear it spoken aloud, needed confirmation that the universe really was this cruel. "Antonio Sellers, you know, the tech billionaire, and Victoria Hartwell. Apparently, it's going to be stunning. The venue alone cost more than most people's houses." There it was. Antonio Sellers. The man she'd loved with a sincerity that terrified her. The man whose mother had looked her up and down like something tracked in on expensive shoes. The man who'd let her walk away because defending her meant risking his inheritance. The man who had no idea he'd fathered twin daughters. "Cheryl, are you still there?" She forced air into her lungs. "I'm here. So can I confirm the girls' participation? The family wants to meet them next week for a fitting." Cheryl's mind raced. She could say no, protect her daughters from a world that had once chewed her up and spit her out. Keep them far away from the Sellers family and their suffocating expectations. But the girls would ask why. And Lila, brilliant, relentless Lila, would keep asking until Cheryl either lied or broke. "Can I think about it?" Cheryl asked. "Of course. But Cheryl, they really want your girls. And honestly, I think this could be beautiful for them." "Beautiful." Cheryl had stopped believing in beautiful things the day Antonio's mother called her a gold digger in a restaurant so expensive Cheryl couldn't pronounce half the menu. "I'll call you back tomorrow," Cheryl said, and ended the call before Pastor Michaels could press further. She stood at the sink for a long moment, staring at her reflection in the window above the faucet. 36 years old, tired eyes, hands that bore the evidence of hard work, calluses, dry skin, a scar from the time she'd sliced her palm open on a broken glass at her second job. These hands had built a life. They'd rocked babies through colic and croup. They'd signed report cards and permission slips. They'd held her daughters when they cried and clapped when they succeeded. And they'd done it all without Antonio Sellers' money, his name, or his approval. "Mama." Cheryl turned, her amber eyes, Antonio's eyes wide with curiosity. "Is something wrong?" After 16 years of practiced reassurance. "Nothing's wrong, baby." "Then why do you look sad?" "Because your father is getting married," Cheryl thought. "And you're going to walk down the aisle at his wedding without knowing he's your father." "I'm just tired," Cheryl said instead. "Long day." Rose studied her for a moment longer, then shrugged and returned to the living room where Lila was sprawled on the couch, sketchbook balanced on her knees. Cheryl exhaled slowly. She could handle this. Antonio wouldn't recognize two little flower girls among dozens of wedding guests and elaborate ceremony details. The twins would have a magical experience. Cheryl would stay invisible in the background, a forgettable face in the crowd. And then it would be over. Life would return to normal. She almost believed it. The formal invitation arrived 3 days later. Cheryl stared at the envelope on her kitchen table like it might explode. Heavy cardstock, gold embossing, the kind of stationery that cost more than her monthly grocery budget. The girls were at school. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. Cheryl sat down and opened the envelope with hands that trembled just slightly. "Mr. Antonio Sellers and Miss Victoria Hartwell request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony." The words blurred. She blinked hard, forcing herself to read the rest. Date, time, venue, dress code. And at the bottom, in elegant script, "We are delighted that Leela and Rose Johnson will serve as our flower girls." Cheryl set the invitation down carefully. For 15 years, she'd imagined this moment differently. She'd imagined Antonio finding out about the twins by accident, running into them at a park, seeing their faces, and realizing what he'd lost. She'd imagined him showing up at her door, demanding to know why she'd never told him, and her responding with the truth. "Because you didn't choose me. And I won't beg you to choose them." She'd imagined confrontation, anger, justice. She had not imagined her daughters walking down the aisle at his wedding to another woman. But here's the thing about single mothers who raise children alone: they get very, very good at swallowing pain and moving forward anyway. Cheryl folded the invitation, slid it back into the envelope, and stood up. She had a shift at the cafe in 40 minutes. The twins needed new shoes before the school year started. The rent was due in 8 days. Antonio Sellers was getting married. And Cheryl Johnson had survived worse things than watching the father of her children pledge his life to someone else. She'd survived this too. But what she didn't know yet, what nobody watching this story unfold could know, was that some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. And sometimes the people who hurt us the most become the ones who fight hardest to make things right. You'll want to stay for this part, because what happens next changes everything. What Cheryl didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that Antonio Sellers had recently made a decision that would shatter both their carefully constructed lives. He'd hired a private investigator. Not for business, not for corporate espionage or competitor research. For something far more personal. Because 16 years ago, a woman had walked out of his life, and he'd never stopped seeing her face in crowds, hearing her laugh in empty rooms, wondering what might have been if he'd chosen differently. And 3 months ago, while cleaning out his mother's storage unit after she'd moved into a smaller penthouse, he'd found something that made his blood run cold. A photograph in a box marked trash. A photograph of Cheryl, pregnant. The investigator's report was supposed to arrive next week, but destiny, as it turns out, had a different timeline in mind. The cafe where Cheryl worked smelled like espresso and cinnamon rolls, a combination that used to comfort her but now just reminded her how far away she was from the life she'd once imagined. She tied her apron, checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror, and forced her face into something resembling professional composure. The morning rush would start in 15 minutes. She needed to stop thinking about Antonio Sellers. She needed to stop remembering. But memory, she'd learned, doesn't require permission. It just arrives uninvited, relentless, carrying pieces of the past in its teeth. 18 years ago, Antonio Sellers was nobody. Not the billionaire CEO whose face graced magazine covers. Not the tech visionary who revolutionized 3 industries before turning 35. Not the man whose engagement to Victoria Hartwell was being called the merger of the century. 17 years ago, he was just Antonio, a graduate student with ambition sharp enough to cut glass, a laptop held together with duct tape, and dreams so big they terrified him. And Cheryl? Cheryl was the administrative assistant at the university's engineering department who noticed him working in the lab at 2 in the morning, surviving on vending machine coffee and sheer determination. She'd brought him real coffee one night. He'd looked up at her like she'd handed him salvation. "You didn't have to do that," he'd said. "I know," she'd replied. "But you looked like you needed someone to care." That's how it started. Not with grand gestures or expensive dates. With care. With attention. With someone seeing him, really seeing him before the world knew his name. They fell in love the way people do when they're young and certain, and haven't yet learned that the world breaks beautiful things without apology. Antonio told her about his plans to build something revolutionary. Cheryl told him she believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. He kissed her in the rain outside the library. She kissed him back like promises were real. For 2 years, they built a life in the margins of his impossible schedule, stolen weekends, late-night conversations, dreams whispered in the dark about the future they'd create together. He told her he'd marry her someday. She believed him. And maybe that was her mistake, believing that love could survive when money and power entered the conversation. Because when Antonio's prototype caught the attention of investors, real investors, the kind with family names that appeared in history textbooks, everything changed. Megan Sellers entered the picture like winter arriving early, cold, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. Antonio's mother. A woman made of designer labels, old money, and the kind of cruelty that hides behind etiquette and pearls. Cheryl would never forget the first time she met Megan. The restaurant was the kind of place where waiters wore white gloves and the chandeliers cost more than cars. Antonio had been nervous, fidgeting with his tie, whispering reassurances. "She'll love you," he'd said. How could she not? Cheryl had worn her best dress, the one she'd saved 3 months to afford. It wasn't enough. Megan Sellers took one look at Cheryl and smiled. Not the warm kind of smile. The kind that calculated net worth and found it lacking. "So, you're the girl Antonio's been spending time with," Megan said, her tone pleasant in the way knives are sharp. "Yes, ma'am," Cheryl replied. "It's wonderful to finally meet you." That single sound carried more judgment than a courtroom verdict. The dinner lasted 2 hours. 2 hours of Megan asking questions designed to humiliate about Cheryl's family background, her education, her prospects, her plans for the future. Each question landed like a punch Cheryl couldn't deflect. Antonio sat frozen, torn between the woman who raised him and the woman he claimed to love. And when the check came, when Megan made a pointed comment about Cheryl's inability to contribute, Antonio said nothing. He just paid. That silence cost them everything. But Cheryl didn't know it yet. She still believed love could survive judgment. She still believed Antonio would choose her when it mattered. The truth was coming. It just hadn't arrived yet. The break came 3 weeks later. Cheryl was at Antonio's apartment, a tiny studio near campus, nothing like the penthouse he'd eventually own when Megan arrived unannounced. Her expression was carved from ice. "We need to talk," Megan said, looking only at Cheryl, alone. Antonio hesitated, his eyes darting between his mother and his girlfriend. Cheryl nodded. She could handle this. The moment the door closed behind Antonio, Megan's mask dropped entirely. "I'm going to make this very simple," Megan said, each word precise as surgery. "You're a gold digger. I've seen 1,000 women like you pretty girls who latch on to ambitious men and drain them dry." Cheryl's hands shook. "That's not. I don't care what you think it is," Megan interrupted. "Antonio has a future, a real future. Investors are circling, opportunities are opening, and you are not part of that equation. He loves me. He thinks he loves you. There's a difference." Megan stepped closer, her perfume expensive and suffocating. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to disappear from his life. And if you truly care about him, if you're not the parasite I think you are, you'll let him build his empire without you dragging him down. And if I don't? Megan's smile was the most terrifying thing Cheryl had ever seen. Then I'll make sure every investor, every partner, every opportunity vanishes. My family controls half the venture capital in this city. One word from me, and Antonio's dreams die before they begin. Is that what you want? To be the reason he fails? Cheryl felt the room tilt. You'd destroy your own son's future? I'd protect it, Megan corrected. From you. The door opened. Antonio walked in, confused by the tension crackling in the air. What's going on? Megan's expression shifted instantly, concern replacing cruelty so seamlessly, it was almost artistic. Cheryl was just telling me she's been offered a job opportunity. Out of state. Isn't that wonderful? Antonio looked at Cheryl. She looked at the floor. This was the moment. The moment where he could have demanded the truth. Where he could have chosen her over his mother's approval. Where love could have been stronger than fear. Cheryl? His voice was tentative, already retreating. But Antonio didn't push. He didn't fight. He just waited. And in that silence, Cheryl understood. He would always choose the path of least resistance. And she would always be the complication he couldn't afford. It's true, Cheryl heard herself say, hating every word. I'm leaving. She walked out of his apartment. Out of his life. She never looked back. Not even when she heard him calling her name down the hallway, his voice breaking on the second syllable. Because looking back would have shattered her. And she needed to stay whole. At least for a little while longer. 6 weeks later, Cheryl discovered she was pregnant. Twins. She sat in the clinic bathroom, staring at the test results, and felt the weight of impossible choices settle over her shoulders like stones. She could tell Antonio. Chase him down, demand he acknowledge what they'd created, force him into responsibility he'd never chosen. Or she could raise these children alone and give them something Antonio had never given her. The certainty that they were wanted. That they weren't complications. That they mattered more than anyone's approval. The choice wasn't even close. Cheryl Johnson disappeared into a different city. A different life, a different version of herself. One built on overtime shifts, government assistance she hated accepting, and the kind of stubborn pride that kept her standing when exhaustion begged her to collapse. She gave birth to Lila and Rose on a Tuesday morning in March. 2 perfect daughters with bronze eyes that looked exactly like their fathers. She named them after her grandmothers, women who'd survived impossible things, and taught her that strength doesn't announce itself, it just shows up day after day. She never put Antonio's name on the birth certificates. And she built a life where his absence became so normal that even she stopped thinking about what might have been. Mostly. Now here's what you need to understand about women like Cheryl. They're everywhere. In your neighborhood, at your workplace, in your own family. Women who carried burdens alone because asking for help felt like admitting defeat. Women who built futures out of broken pieces. Women whose stories deserve to be heard. If you're watching this and thinking about a woman in your life who raised children alone, who sacrificed everything, who turned pain into purpose, leave a comment telling me about her. Tell me her name. Let's honor these women together. Because their stories matter. And this story, this is for every single one of them. Cheryl, order up. The voice yanked her back to the present. She blinked, realizing she'd been standing motionless at the espresso machine for who knows how long. Lost in memories she'd spent 15 years trying to bury. Sorry, she called, grabbing the order ticket. But her hands were shaking. Because tonight, she had to tell the girls about the wedding. She had to explain that they'd been chosen for something special. She had to watch their faces light up with excitement. And she had to pretend her heart wasn't breaking. The past, it seemed, had finally caught up. That evening, Cheryl sat the twins down at their small kitchen table, the same table where they'd done homework and eaten breakfast and built a life together. I have something to tell you, she began. Lila looked up from her sketchbook. Rose set down her library book. Both pairs of familiar eyes locked on their mother with a kind of attention that made Cheryl's chest tight. You know how you performed at the church recital last month? They nodded. Well, someone important was watching. And they want you both to be flower girls at a very special wedding. Rose's mouth fell open. Lila practically vibrated with excitement. A real wedding? Rose breathed. Like with fancy dresses and flowers and everything? Lila added. Everything, Cheryl confirmed, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Whose wedding? Rose asked. There it was. The question Cheryl had dreaded. She could lie, make up some anonymous wealthy couple, keep the truth buried a little longer. Or she could offer just enough truth to satisfy their curiosity without unraveling everything. A businessman named Antonio Sellers and his fiancée, Cheryl said carefully. They're very successful, very wealthy, and they wanted children from our church to participate. Do you know him? Lila asked, eyes narrowing with the perceptiveness that sometimes terrified Cheryl. I knew him a long time ago, Cheryl said, before you were born. Were you friends? We were. Something like that. Rose leaned forward, curiosity brightening her face. Are we going to meet him? Cheryl's throat tightened. Maybe. But you'll mostly be focused on your responsibilities as flower girls. It's a big honor. The twins exploded into excited chatter, talking over each other about dresses and flowers and how many people would be watching. Cheryl watched them and felt the impossible weight of secrets pressing against her ribs. They had his eyes, his stubborn chin, his relentless curiosity, his brilliance simmering just beneath the surface. You can outrun the past, Cheryl thought, but you can't outrun biology. You can't hide what's written in bone structure and eye color, and the way your daughters tilt their heads when they're thinking exactly the way their father used to. The truth was coming. Cheryl could feel it approaching like a storm she couldn't outrun. All she could do was brace for impact. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Cheryl sat alone in the dark living room and made her decision. She wouldn't withdraw the twins from the wedding. Antonio wouldn't notice two small flower girls among hundreds of guests and elaborate ceremony details. The ceremony would last an hour, maybe two, then it would be over. She'd survived 17 years without him. She could survive one afternoon. But what Cheryl didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that across the city, in a penthouse office overlooking the glittering skyline, Antonio Sellers was opening an envelope. Cheryl Johnson had given birth to twin daughters 16 years ago, exactly 9 months after she'd left him. And the attached photographs showed two girls with bronze eyes that looked exactly like his own. Antonio's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, then stopped. His wedding was in 3 weeks, but everything, absolutely everything, had just changed. Because the man who'd spent 15 years building an empire had just discovered he'd already had treasure and never knew it. And this time, he wouldn't let fear make his decisions. This time, he'd fight. The Grand Meridian Hotel didn't just host events. It devoured them whole into marble and gold leaf, and the kind of opulence that made regular people feel like trespassers. Cheryl stood in the entrance hall with the twins, her hand gripping her small purse so tightly her knuckles went white. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like frozen waterfalls. The floor was polished to a mirror shine. Even the air smelled expensive jasmine and something else Cheryl couldn't name, something that probably cost more per ounce than her monthly rent. Mama, Rose whispered, eyes enormous. This place is like a palace. It's not a palace, Lila corrected, already sketching mental notes for later, but it's close. A woman in a tailored suit approached, clipboard in hand, smile professionally warm. You must be the Johnsons. Welcome. The girls can follow me to the staging area. We'll get them fitted for their flower girl baskets and run through the processional. Cheryl's stomach clenched. This was real. This was happening. And somewhere in this massive building, Antonio Sellers was preparing to rehearse a wedding to a woman who wasn't her. Can I come with them? Cheryl asked, hating how small her voice sounded in this enormous space. Of course. Parents are welcome during rehearsal. The woman led them through corridors that seemed designed to remind visitors of their insignificance. Towering ceilings, artwork that probably belonged in museums, windows overlooking manicured gardens, where a single tree likely cost more than Cheryl's car. They entered the grand ballroom. Cheryl's breath caught. The space was massive, vaulted ceilings painted with clouds and cherubs, floor-to-ceiling windows draped in silk, a stage at the far end where the ceremony would take place. Florists were arranging elaborate displays of white roses and orchids. A string quartet was setting up in the corner. Event coordinators moved like synchronized dancers, checking lights, adjusting chairs, perfecting details Cheryl would never have thought to consider. And everywhere was evidence of wealth so casual it didn't need to announce itself. This is where dreams come true, Rose breathed. Cheryl thought, this is where mine ended. But she didn't say it. Because her daughters deserved to believe in beautiful things, even if she'd stopped believing years ago. The twins were swept into a flurry of activity measurements, basket assignments, instructions about walking speed and pedal distribution. Cheryl hung back near the wall, trying to blend into the elaborate wallpaper. She scanned the room compulsively. Antonio wasn't here yet. Maybe he wouldn't come to the rehearsal. Maybe important grooms delegated this kind of thing to wedding planners and assistants. Maybe. The ballroom doors opened, and Antonio Sellers walked in. Time didn't stop. That's a cliché people use when they don't know how to describe the way the universe suddenly rearranges itself around a single moment. But Cheryl felt it anyway. The shift. The weight. The 17 years of distance collapsing into nothing. He was older, obviously. The graduate student she'd loved had been replaced by something sharper, more refined. His suit probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. His posture radiated the kind of confidence that comes from commanding boardrooms and bending industries to your will. His dark hair was threaded with gray at the temples. His jawline was harder. But his eyes, those eyes hadn't changed at all. And when they swept the room, Cheryl pressed herself further against the wall, heart hammering. Don't look at me, she thought desperately. Don't see me. Let me be invisible. Antonio moved through the space like he owned it, which, given his wealth, he probably could have. Event coordinators rushed to greet him. The wedding planner materialized with a tablet full of questions. His fiancée, Victoria, appeared from somewhere in a cloud of perfume and designer fabric, kissing his cheek with practiced affection. Cheryl watched it all through a haze of surreal detachment. This was his world now. A world she'd never belonged to. A world that had spit her out 17 years ago and never looked back. All right, flower girls, the coordinator's voice rang out. Let's practice your entrance. Lila and Rose stepped into position at the back of the makeshift aisle. They were giggling, whispering to each other, practically vibrating with excitement. Remember slow, graceful steps, scatter petals gently, and smile. The music cued. The twins started walking, and Antonio, who'd been half listening to Victoria discuss seating arrangements, happened to glance up. His entire body went rigid. Cheryl saw it happen in real time, the casual glance becoming a stare, the stare becoming something closer to shock, his face draining of color as the twins walked past him giggling about their petal scattering technique. He took a half step forward, then froze completely. Because whatever the private investigator's report had told him, whatever he'd suspected, nothing could have prepared him for seeing his own face reflected back at him in duplicate. Lila's fierce expression as she concentrated on her steps, Rose's quiet grace as she scattered petals. Both of them carrying his eyes, his bone structure, his mannerisms in ways that made denial impossible. The twins finished their practice run and bounded back to the staging area, oblivious to the man standing motionless in the center of the ballroom, staring after them like he'd seen ghosts, or miracles, or the past coming back to demand payment. Victoria was talking to him. He didn't hear a word. His world had just tilted off its axis. And standing across the ballroom, Cheryl knew her secret was over. Cheryl knew she needed to leave. Right now, immediately, before Antonio's shock crystallized into recognition, before he connected the twins to her, before 17 years of carefully constructed distance shattered completely. She started moving toward the exit, head down, praying for invisibility one last time. She almost made it. Cheryl. His voice stopped her cold. Not loud. Just her name, spoken like a question and an accusation and a prayer all at once. She didn't turn around. Don't, she whispered. Please don't. But Antonio was already moving toward her, the ballroom fading into background noise as he crossed the distance between them, with purpose that made event coordinators step aside. Cheryl, closer now, desperate. Look at me. She had no choice. She turned, and for the first time in 17 years, they stood face to face. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. Cheryl saw it the way his expression shifted from shock to confusion to something that looked dangerously close to devastation. It's you, he breathed. Don't cause a scene, Cheryl said quietly. Glancing around, no one was watching them yet, but that could change instantly in a room full of people paid to notice details. Not here. Those girls, his voice cracked. Cheryl, are they? This is neither the place nor the time. I need to know. No. Cheryl's hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. You need to get married. You need to focus on your bride. You need to pretend you didn't see me. I can't. You did it once before. The words came out harder than she intended, carrying 17 years of buried pain. You're good at pretending I don't exist. Antonio flinched, like she'd struck him. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. Silence stretched between them, 17 years of silence compressed into 10 seconds that felt like drowning. Antonio's jaw worked. The investigator's report said you had daughters. I didn't want to believe. So he'd known. Or suspected. Cheryl's stomach dropped. You investigated me? I never stopped looking for you. The words hung in the air like smoke. Cheryl laughed, a short, bitter sound that made a nearby waiter glance their direction. You stopped looking 17 years ago, Antonio. The moment your mother told you to. That's not. He ran a hand through his hair, and Cheryl saw the gesture was the same as it had been when he was 23 and overwhelmed. Cheryl, please. I need to know. Are they mine? Across the ballroom, the twins were laughing about something, their bronze eyes, Antonio's eyes, sparkling with joy. They're mine, Cheryl said firmly. They have been for 15 years. I raised them. I fed them. I tucked them in every night. I taught them to read and to stand up for themselves and to never let anyone make them feel less than they are. But biologically, you lost the right to ask questions when you let me walk away. Antonio's hands curled into fists at his sides. I didn't know you were pregnant. Would it have mattered? The question landed like a slap. Antonio opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Yes, he finally whispered. God, yes. It would have changed everything. But you didn't choose me, Cheryl said softly. Not when it mattered. Not when your mother called me a gold digger and threatened to destroy your future if I didn't leave. You stood there and said nothing. I was terrified. I was terrified too, Antonio. And pregnant. And alone. And I chose them anyway. Cheryl turned to leave, unable to breathe in this space that smelled like money and mistakes. Antonio caught her arm, gentle, desperate. Please, don't run again. We need to talk about this. Really talk. Cheryl pulled free, but carefully, aware that people were starting to notice their conversation. I'm taking the girls home, she said. And you're going back to your fiancé, and we're both going to pretend this conversation never happened. Cheryl. They don't know, she interrupted, voice breaking slightly. The twins. They don't know who you are. And I'm not ready to tell them. Something shifted in Antonio's expression, hurt, yes, but also understanding that made him more human than the polished CEO facade he wore. When? He asked hoarsely. When can we talk? I don't know. After the wedding. You're getting married, Antonio. To someone else. This conversation ends here. She walked away before he could respond. Before she started crying. Before the twins noticed their mother falling apart in the most expensive ballroom she'd ever set foot in. Antonio stood frozen as Cheryl collected the twins and left, murmuring something to the coordinator about Rose feeling unwell. Victoria appeared at his elbow, concern creasing her perfectly made-up face. Darling, you look pale. Are you all right? He wasn't. He wasn't anywhere close to all right. Because somewhere between the rehearsal starting and this moment, his entire world had rearranged itself around a truth he could no longer deny. He had daughters. 2 daughters who looked exactly like him. Daughters he'd never known existed. Daughters who didn't know he was their father. And the woman he'd never stopped loving, the woman his mother had driven away, the woman he'd failed to defend, had raised them alone for 15 years without asking him for anything. Antonio, Victoria pressed, her hand on his arm. What's wrong? He looked at his fiancée. Beautiful. Appropriate. Approved by every family member and business associate. The perfect choice for a man building an empire. And suddenly, Antonio understood something with brutal clarity. He'd spent 17 years making the safe choice, the expected choice, the choice that cost him nothing except his soul. I need to make a call, he said distantly. He walked out of the ballroom, pulled out his phone, and dialed his assistant. Chris, cancel my meetings tomorrow. Actually cancel everything for the next week. Sir, you have the board presentation on Thursday. Cancel it. Reschedule it. I don't care. I need to find someone. And I'm not losing her again. He hung up before Chris could ask questions. Then Antonio Sellars, billionaire CEO, powerful businessman, man who'd negotiated impossible deals without flinching, stood in an empty corridor and made a promise to the universe. He would get answers. He would meet his daughters properly. He would fix what he'd broken 17 years ago. And he would not lose his family again. Even if it meant burning his entire carefully constructed life to the ground. The wedding could wait. His empire could wait. Nothing mattered more than this. Nothing had ever mattered more than this. Cheryl was folding laundry when someone knocked on her apartment door. Not a polite knock. A determined one. The kind that said the person on the other side wasn't leaving until they got what they came for. She glanced at the clock, 7:43 a.m. The twins were still asleep, blissfully unaware that their world was about to shift beneath their feet. She had 30 minutes before they needed to wake up for school. The knock came again. Louder. More insistent. Cheryl set down the towel she'd been folding, her stomach already knowing what her mind didn't want to acknowledge. She opened the door. Antonio Sellars stood in her hallway, still wearing yesterday's suit, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. Dark circles under his eyes. Stubble shadowing his jaw. Hair disheveled from running his hands through it too many times. "How did you find me?" Cheryl asked, her voice flat. "Does it matter?" "Yes. I have resources." Antonio's jaw was tight. "Can I come in?" "No." "Cheryl. My daughters are sleeping 10 feet away. Whatever you need to say, you can say it out here." Antonio glanced down the hallway-worn carpet, flickering fluorescent light. A neighbor's door covered in peeling paint. This was where she'd raised his children. This was the life she'd built, while he'd been signing billion-dollar deals in marble lobbies and staying in hotels where a single night cost more than her monthly rent. Something in his expression cracked a glimpse of pain so raw that Cheryl almost felt sorry for him. "Almost. Please," he said quietly. "I just need to talk to you." Cheryl considered him for a long moment. Then she stepped into the hallway, pulling the door almost closed behind her. "You have 5 minutes." They stood facing each other in the dingy corridor, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Cheryl crossed her arms. Antonio looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, trying to decide whether jumping would hurt less than staying. "Are they mine?" he asked, voice raw. "I already answered that question." "You didn't. You said they were yours." "That's not the same thing." Cheryl's eyes hardened. "Biologically, yes. Lila and Rose are your daughters. But in every way that actually matters, they're mine. I'm the one who held them when they were sick at 3 in the morning. I'm the one who showed up to every recital, every parent-teacher conference, every moment of their lives. You want credit for genetics? Fine. You contributed DNA 15 years ago. Congratulations." The words hit Antonio like physical blows. Each one finding its mark. Each one deserved. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "You have to believe me. I had no idea you were pregnant, because I never got the chance to tell you." "What?" Cheryl laughed bitterly. "You think I just disappeared and never looked back? Antonio, I tried to reach you. Once." His face went white. "When?" 2 months after I left, after I'd taken 3 pregnancy tests and cried in more bathrooms than I can count. After I'd realized that no matter how much pride I had, I couldn't do this alone." Cheryl's voice shook, but she kept going, the truth finally spilling out after 15 years of silence. "I called your apartment," your mother answered. The air left Antonio's lungs. "No." "Yes. I told her I needed to speak with you, that it was urgent." She asked why. "And I was so stupid I told her I was pregnant." Antonio's hands curled into fists. "What did she say?" "She called me a gold digger. Again. Said I was trying to trap you with a pregnancy claim. Said if I ever contacted you again, she'd make sure I regretted it. Then she told me you were engaged to someone appropriate and that you'd moved on with your life." "That was a lie." Antonio's voice cracked. "I wasn't engaged. I was miserable. I was looking for you in every coffee shop, every street corner, well, your mother made sure I didn't know that." Cheryl's eyes shone with unshed tears. "She said you'd signed papers giving up any parental rights to illegitimate children. She said she'd already consulted lawyers. She made it very clear that I was to disappear and never contact your family again." "None of that was real," Antonio breathed, the full scope of his mother's betrayal hitting him. "Cheryl, none of it, There were no papers, no lawyers, nothing. How was I supposed to know? Cheryl's voice rose slightly, then she caught herself, glancing at her apartment door. When she continued, it was quieter but no less fierce. I was 23 years old, pregnant with twins, and terrified. Your mother, with all her money and all her power, told me to disappear. So I did. Antonio leaned against the wall like his legs might give out. She stole 15 years from me. She stole them from all of us. Silence fell between them, thick and suffocating, and filled with the ghosts of what might have been. Antonio's jaw worked. Why didn't you try again? Later, when you were more stable? When the girls were older? And there it was. The question Cheryl had known was coming. The one she'd been dreading. Because you didn't choose me, she said simply. What? That night at your apartment, when your mother told me to leave, you stood there and said nothing, Antonio. You let me walk away. You let her destroy us, without saying a single word in my defense. I was terrified of losing my funding. And I was terrified of losing you. Cheryl's voice cracked. But I would have chosen you over anything, over everything. And you chose safety. You chose not making waves. You chose your mother's approval over fighting for us. The truth hung between them like broken glass. Sharp, undeniable, cutting both of them. Antonio's eyes were red. I was wrong. Yes, you were. If I could go back. But you can't. Cheryl's voice softened slightly. And I made peace with that a long time ago. I built a life. I raised our daughters. And I taught them something you never learned, that love without courage is just words. Antonio flinched, but he didn't argue. Because she was right. He had been a coward. And no amount of success or wealth or power could change that fundamental truth. I want to be in their lives, Antonio said finally. I want to know them. Support them. Make up for lost time. No, Cheryl. You don't get to buy your way into their hearts with money and guilt. That's not what I'm trying to do. Isn't it? Cheryl's eyes flashed. Let me guess, you want to write a check, set up trust funds, pay for private schools and expensive camps, and everything they've never had. You want to fix 15 years of absence with your credit card and think that makes you a father. Antonio's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, Cheryl said, her voice carrying both disappointment and vindication. Then what do you want? Antonio asked, frustration bleeding into his tone. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. I want you to understand something. Cheryl stepped closer, her voice low and intense. My daughters are not props for your guilt. They are not projects you can fix, or investments you can optimize, or problems you can solve with a board meeting strategy. They are real children with real feelings who've built a real life without you. I know that. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man who's used to solving problems with money and power. But this isn't a corporate merger, Antonio. You can't negotiate your way into their hearts. You can't buy their love. You can't make 15 years disappear because it's inconvenient. Then how? His voice broke. How do I fix this? Cheryl studied him for a long moment, seeing past the expensive suit and the desperation to the scared kid he'd once been. You show up, she said finally. Not with gifts. Not with grand gestures. Not with your name, or your money, or your influence. Just you. The person you are when nobody's watching. The man who makes pancakes wrong and tells bad jokes and asks about homework. I don't know how to make pancakes. Then you learn. Antonio's throat worked. And if I do that, if I show up consistently, without excuses, will you let me be their father? Cheryl's expression softened slightly. They already have a mother who's been father and mother both for 15 years. What they need now is someone who proves that fathers can stay, that men can be counted on, that promises mean something. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Can you be that person, Antonio? Or will you disappear the moment it gets hard? The moment a board meeting conflicts with a school play? The moment being a father becomes inconvenient? The question hung in the air. Antonio looked at her, this woman who'd survived what should have broken her, who'd raised 2 children alone without his help or his money, who'd built something beautiful out of pain and determination. I won't disappear, he said quietly. Not again, not ever. Pretty words. I know, but I'm going to prove them anyway. Cheryl searched his face for a long moment, looking for the lie. the escape clause, the inevitable disappointment. She didn't find it. Not yet, anyway. I'm not letting you tell them yet, she said finally. Not until I'm sure, not until they're ready, not until I trust that you're going to stay. How long? As long as it takes. Antonio nodded slowly. What are the rules? Cheryl hadn't expected that question. Rules? You're right, I can't buy my way in. So tell me the boundaries, tell me what you need. I'll follow them. For the first time since opening her door, Cheryl felt something loosen in her chest. No money, she said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. We've survived without it this long. Okay. No making promises to them you can't keep. Okay. No showing up randomly and disrupting their lives. We coordinate through me first. Okay. And Antonio? Cheryl's voice dropped. If you hurt them, if you walk away even once, I will make sure you never see them again. I don't care how many lawyers you have or how much money you throw at me. Are we clear? Antonio held her gaze without flinching. Crystal clear. Good. Cheryl turned toward her apartment door, then paused. One more thing. What? Your wedding is in 2 weeks. What are you going to do about that? The question hit Antonio like ice water. Victoria. The ceremony. The merger of families and fortunes that everyone expected. The future he'd been building toward that suddenly felt like someone else's life. I don't know, he admitted. Figure it out, Cheryl said quietly. Because my daughters deserve a father who's all in, not someone splitting himself between 2 lives. She slipped back into her apartment, closing the door softly behind her. Antonio stood alone in the hallway. Everything had changed. His mother had orchestrated the destruction of his family. The woman he'd never stopped loving had raised his children alone. And he was supposed to get married in 2 weeks to someone who wasn't Cheryl. He pulled out his phone, dialed. His mother answered on the second ring, her voice bright and completely unaware of what was coming. Antonio, darling, we need to talk, he said, his voice colder than she'd ever heard it. Now. And for the first time in his life, Antonio Solars chose the difficult path. He chose truth over comfort. He chose his daughters over approval. He chose Cheryl over everything else. Even if it meant burning his entire carefully constructed world to ash. 3 days later, Cheryl sat her daughters down and told them the truth. Not all of it, 15 years of secrets, couldn't be unpacked in a single conversation. But enough. Remember the wedding? Cheryl began. Her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. The businessman I told you about, Antonio Sellers? Lila and Rose nodded, their bronze eyes, his eyes fixed on their mother. I knew him a long time ago, before you were born. We were together. Rose's eyes widened slightly. Lila leaned forward, already connecting dots with that brilliant mind that missed nothing. And there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago, but I was. Cheryl's voice cracked. I was scared. Scared of what? Rose asked softly. Cheryl took a breath that felt like drowning. Antonio Sellers is your father. The silence that followed was absolute. Not confused silence. Not disbelieving silence. The kind of silence that comes when a piece of a puzzle you've been carrying your whole life suddenly clicks into place and explains everything. Lila spoke first, her voice measured and careful. Our father. The one you said left before we were born. I never said he left, Cheryl corrected gently. I said he didn't know about you. And that was true. He didn't know. Until 3 days ago. Why didn't he know? Rose's eyes were filling with tears. And here was the impossible part, explaining adult choices to children who deserved simple answers. Because his family didn't approve of me, and I was young and scared, and I thought keeping you away from that rejection was protecting you. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was never wrong about loving you. But he knows now? Lila asked. Yes. Since when? Since the rehearsal. He saw you both and Cheryl swallowed hard. He knew immediately. You look exactly like him. The twins looked at each other, in that silent twin language Cheryl had never quite learned to interpret. Finally, Rose asked the question that mattered most. Does he want to meet us? Cheryl nodded, tears finally spilling over. Very much, if you want to meet him. What happened next surprised Cheryl. Rose started crying, not angry tears, but relieved ones. Like a question she'd carried her whole life, finally had an answer. Lila's jaw trembled, her fierce armor cracking just enough to show the vulnerable girl beneath. Can we? Lila whispered. Can we meet him? Yes, Cheryl said. Yes, you can. Antonio had rented out an entire floor of the city's Innovation Museum. Not to show off, though, the opulence was undeniable. But because he had no idea how to be a father to two teenage girls he'd never met, and he was terrified of doing this in public, where his inevitable failures would be witnessed by strangers. He checked his watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. They were supposed to arrive at 2. It was 1:58. The longest 2 minutes of his life stretched ahead. His assistant had offered to stay, provide support, run interference if needed. Antonio had declined. This needed to be just him, just them. No buffers, no safety nets. Then he heard voices in the hallway, Cheryl's low and careful, the twins higher and uncertain. The door opened, and Antonio's daughters walked in. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking than he remembered from the rehearsal. They had his eyes, yes, but also his mannerisms, the way Lila tilted her head when processing information, the way Rose's fingers drummed against her leg when she was nervous, the way they both stood with their weight slightly forward, ready to move. They were both staring at him. He was staring back. Nobody knew what to say. The silence stretched. Finally, Lila broke it with the most teenage response imaginable. You look exactly like us, or we look exactly like you. It's weird. Antonio laughed, a startled, genuine sound that broke the tension like a stone through glass. It is weird, he agreed. Good weird or bad weird? Too early to tell, Lila said, but the corner of her mouth twitched upward. Rose was quieter, studying him with those bronze eyes that mirrored his own, looking for something she couldn't quite name. Did you really not know about us? She asked. The question carried the weight of 15 years of wondering. I really didn't. If I had Antonio's throat tightened, everything would have been different. Cheryl stood near the door, arms crossed, watching but not hovering, not leaving either. So, Antonio said, forcing himself to breathe normally. I thought maybe I could show you around. If you want, no pressure. We can leave any time you're uncomfortable. Around where? Lila asked. A few of my favorite places in the city. Places I think you might like, but only if you want to. The twins looked at each other again, that silent communication that excluded everyone else. Then, back at him. Okay, Rose said softly. The innovation lab was first. Floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city. Workstations full of technology most people wouldn't see for another 5 years. Engineers building impossible things with casual brilliance. Antonio watched as Lila gravitated immediately toward a 3D holographic design station like iron to a magnet. Can I? She asked, fingers already reaching. Try it, Antonio encouraged. She did. And within minutes, she was manipulating holographic models with the kind of intuitive understanding that usually took months to develop, her hands moving through the air like she was conducting an orchestra. Antonio stood beside her, pointing out features, explaining concepts. She absorbed everything like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to speak this language. You're good at this, Antonio said quietly. I like building things, Lila replied, not looking away from the hologram. In my head, mostly. We can't afford the software at home. The casual mention of can't afford hit Antonio like a punch to the sternum. His daughter, brilliant, talented, full of potential, had been limited by resources he possessed in absurd abundance. What would you build if you could build anything? He asked. Lila finally looked at him, her expression serious beyond her years. Something that matters, not just something that makes money, something that helps people. Antonio felt something crack open in his chest. You sound like your mother. Is that bad? That's the best possible thing you could sound like. The rooftop garden was Rose's place. She walked among the carefully cultivated plants, herbs, flowers, small trees and massive planters with her fingers trailing over leaves. Her face peaceful in a way Antonio instinctively understood. He came here when the world got too loud. Apparently, his daughter did too. I didn't know places like this existed in the city, Rose murmured, touching a flowering jasmine plant with reverence. Not many people do, Antonio said. I come here when everything else feels like too much. Does it feel like too much often? More than I'd like. Rose stopped beside the jasmine, breathing in the scent with her eyes closed. Mama has a tiny herb garden on our balcony, she said. I take care of it. She's too busy working. What do you grow? Basil, mint, rosemary. Small things. Things that fit in containers. Things that don't need much space. Antonio heard what she wasn't saying. Things we can afford. Things that don't take up space we don't have. If you could have any garden, Antonio asked carefully, what would you grow? Rose's face lit up the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it was devastating in its beauty. Everything. Vegetables and flowers and fruit trees, and a whole section just for pollinators, because bees are dying and someone needs to help them, and she stopped, embarrassed. Sorry, I get carried away. Don't apologize, Antonio said firmly. Never apologize for caring about things. The world needs more people who get carried away about what matters. Rose studied him for a long moment. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone scarier maybe. Someone who felt less real. Antonio's throat tightened. I'm very real. And I'm very sorry I wasn't there before. Mama says you didn't know. I didn't. But that doesn't make the absence hurt less for you. And I'm sorry for that too. Rose nodded slowly, processing. Then, almost shyly, she reached out and touched a small scar on Antonio's hand. How'd you get this? Soldering iron. I was 18 and thought I knew better than safety protocols. Mama has a scar from a broken glass at her work. I know. I saw it. A long time ago. They stood in silence for a moment, father and daughter, strangers and mirrors. Do you want to help me water the plants? Antonio asked. Rose smiled, genuine this time. Okay. Cheryl watched from a bench near the garden entrance. She'd stayed back deliberately, giving them space, fighting every maternal instinct to hover and protect and intervene. But she saw everything. The way Lila challenged Antonio with questions he had to actually think about, testing him, seeing if he was real or just another disappointment waiting to happen. The way Rose softened around him, her usual caution melting into curiosity. The way Antonio looked at them like they were miracles he didn't deserve, but would die protecting. And Cheryl felt something terrifying unfurl in her chest. Hope. Not hope that Antonio would become the person she'd once loved. That person was gone, replaced by someone older and scarred and maybe wiser. But hope that he might become the father her daughters deserved. That scared her more than hatred ever could. Because hope meant vulnerability. And vulnerability meant the possibility of pain. You know what's beautiful about second chances? They don't erase the first failure. They don't pretend the pain didn't happen. They just say, I see what I did, I understand what I lost, and I'm willing to do the work to earn something better. If you've ever given someone a second chance, or wished someone would give you one, hit that like button. Because this story is about to show you what happens when people actually do the work, when they show up, when they prove that change is possible. And trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. They were in the building's private library, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling books, the kind of quiet that felt sacred when Megan Sellers arrived unannounced. Antonio's assistant had texted him 3 times, Your mother is on her way up. I couldn't stop her. He'd ignored all 3 messages. Mistake. The library door opened with enough force to make heads turn. Megan swept in wearing designer everything, and an expression of controlled fury that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Her eyes found Antonio first, then the twins, then Cheryl, and her face twisted into something ugly. So it's true, Megan said, her voice sharp enough to cut. You're actually entertaining this fantasy. Antonio stood immediately, positioning himself between his mother and his daughters. Mother. Don't mother me. I've been hearing rumors all week that you've been seen with, she gestured dismissively at Cheryl, like she was something unpleasant on the bottom of an expensive shoe. Her. And 2 children who are supposedly, they're my daughters, Antonio said flatly, his voice carrying steel. They're mistakes. The word landed like a bomb. Lila's face went white. Rose looked like she'd been physically slapped. Cheryl stood, fists clenched, ready to destroy anyone who hurt her children. But Antonio moved first. Get out, he said, his voice low and deadly in a way that made several library patrons look up alarmed. Antonio, I said get out, now, before I say things we can't take back. Megan laughed cold and sharp, the sound of someone who'd never been told no in her life. You're throwing away your entire future for this, for some gold digger and her. Call her that again, Antonio interrupted, his voice shaking with rage he'd suppressed for 17 years. "Say one more word about Cheryl or my daughters, and I swear to God, I will cut you out of my life so completely you'll forget you ever had a son." The library had gone silent. Every person watching, every breath held. Megan stared at him, genuinely shocked. "You don't mean that?" "I have never meant anything more in my entire life." Megan's expression hardened into something cruel. "You'll regret this. I'll disinherit you. You'll lose access to the family trust, the connections, everything I built for you. The only thing I regret is listening to you 17 years ago when you drove away the woman I loved and stole my children from me. I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself. Your image, your control. And I'm done. We're done." Megan turned on her heel, her exit as dramatic as her entrance, and slammed the door behind her with enough force to rattle the bookshelves. Silence fell like snow. Antonio turned to the twins, his heart breaking at the tears streaming down their faces. "I'm so sorry," he said hoarsely, dropping to his knees, so he was at their level. "She had no right to say those things. No right at all." "Is that what people think?" Rose whispered, her voice small and broken. "That we're mistakes?" "No. That's what one bitter woman thinks because she's terrified of losing control. But she's wrong. About everything." Lila's jaw was set, tears streaming but her voice steady. "She called Mama a gold digger. She's wrong about that too. Your mother is the strongest, most capable person I've ever known. She raised you without any help from me, without asking for anything, and turned you into two incredible human beings. And you two are not mistakes. You're the best thing I never knew I needed." The words hung in the air. Rose looked at Lila. Lila looked at Rose. Then they both looked at Antonio with eyes that mirrored his own. "Daddy?" Rose said, quiet, uncertain, testing the word like it might break. Antonio's breath caught in his chest. "Yeah?" he managed, his voice thick. "Will you really stay, even though your mother is mad? Even though it's complicated?" He dropped fully to his knees so he was at their level, looking directly into their faces. "I will stay. I promise. No matter what. Your grandmother doesn't get to decide who matters in my life. You do. And you matter more than anything." Lila stepped forward, first tentative, testing, ready to pull back if this turned out to be another disappointment. Then Rose. And then both twins were hugging him, and Antonio wrapped his arms around his daughters for the first time, and he felt like maybe, just maybe, he was finally doing something right in his life. Across the room, Cheryl watched with tears streaming down her face. And for the first time in 17 years, she let herself believe in possibilities. The story broke at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Cheryl was pouring cereal for the twins when her phone started buzzing with notifications. Not one or two, dozens. Then hundreds. Then, so many the phone actually heated up in her hand. Her hands went numb. She picked up the device and saw her name trending on social media alongside Antonio's, climbing higher every second she watched. The headline made her stomach drop. "Billionaire groom's secret. Antonio Sellars has twin daughters he never knew existed." Below it, a photo grainy but unmistakable of Antonio, with Lila and Rose, in the rooftop garden, taken from a distance, with a telephoto lens. Someone had been watching. Someone had been waiting. Someone had sold them out. "Mama?" Lila looked up from her breakfast, immediately sensing something wrong. "You okay?" Cheryl couldn't answer. Because she was scrolling through comments, and each one was a knife. Gold digger finally got her payday. She trapped him 15 years ago, and now she's cashing in before the wedding. Those kids are probably not even his. Classic scam. Wait till he's successful, then show up with his children. Feel bad for his real fiancé who has to deal with this drama. Baby trapper exposed. The cruelty was breathtaking. Not because it was new, Cheryl had been called these things before, but because this time, her daughters could see it. This time, the whole world was watching. This time, there was no hiding. Rose appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "What's wrong?" And Cheryl realized she couldn't protect them from this. The truth was out. And the world, in all its cruelty, was making its judgment. Antonio's phone rang at 7:15 a.m. His PR director, Elena, sounded like she'd already had 12 cups of coffee and was preparing for 12 more. "We need to get ahead of this, now. The stories everywhere, tabloids, news sites, Social media trending at number 2. Your mother's camp is already spinning it as, "My mother's camp?" Antonio interrupted, his voice dangerous. "She gave a statement an hour ago. Supposedly off the record, but it leaked anyway, almost like it was designed to leak. She's calling Cheryl an opportunist and suggesting the twins' parentage should be verified before you destroy your future with a poor decision." Antonio's grip on the phone tightened so hard the case cracked. "Elena, I want a press conference. Today." "Antonio, that's not advisable. Let me draft a statement, Will. Today. And I'm giving the statement myself. No prepared remarks, no sanitized corporate messaging, no lawyer-vetted sentences. Me. The truth. That's it." Elena was silent for 3 seconds. An eternity in PR crisis management. "You're sure about this? Once you go public defending her, there's no walking it back. The narrative will be set. Your reputation." "I'm not walking anything back. Schedule it, 2 p.m. I'll be there." The press conference was set up in the main lobby of Sellers Global Tech headquarters. Antonio stood in front of a wall of cameras, reporters, and microphones, wearing a suit but no tie, looking every bit the Billionaire CEO, except for one crucial detail. He looked human, vulnerable, raw. And that made him more powerful than any polished corporate image ever could. "I'm going to keep this brief," Antonio began, his voice steady but carrying an edge of steel that made reporters lean forward. "There's been speculation about my personal life, about the existence of my daughters, about the character of their mother. I'm here to set the record straight." Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters' pens hovered over notepads. The world held its breath. 15 years ago, I was in a relationship with Cheryl Johnson. We were young, we were in love. And my family, specifically my mother, disapproved. Cheryl was forced out of my life through threats, manipulation, and cruelty I'm only now beginning to fully understand. Murmurs rippled through the room, like water disturbed. Cheryl discovered she was pregnant after we'd been separated. She tried to contact me. My mother intercepted that contact and lied to both of us. Cheryl believed I'd moved on and wanted nothing to do with her or our children. I believe Cheryl had simply disappeared. We were both victims of manipulation designed to keep us apart. Antonio's voice grew harder, each word landing like a gavel. For 15 years, Cheryl Johnson raised our daughters alone. She worked multiple jobs. She sacrificed everything. She skipped meals so they could eat. She never asked me for a single cent. Not $1. Not one phone call. Not one moment of help. Nothing. He paused, letting that sink in. The narrative being spread right now that Cheryl is a gold digger, that she trapped me, that she's cashing in on some calculated scheme, is not just wrong. It's obscene, it's insulting, and it stops now. The room was silent enough to hear heartbeats. Cheryl Johnson is the strongest person I've ever known. She protected my daughters from a world that would have judged them for circumstances they didn't choose. She gave them a childhood filled with love, instead of luxury. She taught them to be brilliant, kind, fierce human beings. And she did it without me, because I failed her 17 years ago. Antonio's voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from emotion he refused to hide. Lila and Rose are my daughters. There is no question about their parentage. Anyone who looks at them can see my face reflected back. But more importantly, they are extraordinary human beings, raised by an extraordinary mother who deserves respect, not slander. He looked directly into the cameras, addressing not just reporters, but the entire watching world. My only regret is not finding them sooner. Everything else in my life pales in comparison to the 15 years I lost with my children. Every business success, every achievement, every dollar. None of it matters as much as the time I can never get back. Reporters started shouting questions, a cacophony of demands for details. Antonio ignored them all. I won't be taking questions, but I will say this. Anyone who attacks Cheryl Johnson or my daughters will answer to me, personally, and I have resources you can't imagine. He walked off the stage while cameras flashed and reporters shouted after him. The room erupted into chaos. But Antonio didn't care. He'd said what needed to be said. The rest was just noise. Cheryl watched the press conference from her apartment, the twins on either side of her, on the worn couch. By the time Antonio finished speaking, she was crying. Not from shame, not from fear. from something she hadn't let herself feel in 17 years. Protection. Someone was defending her. Publicly. Without hesitation. Without calculation. Without caring what it cost him. He really said all that? Rose whispered, her own eyes wet. He really did, Cheryl managed through tears. Lila was quiet for a moment, processing in that intense way she had. Then, he's different than I thought billionaires would be. How so? Cheryl asked. He's real. Like, actually real. Not fake TV real. Actually real. And that, Cheryl thought, was exactly the problem. Because fake would have been easier to protect herself against. Real was dangerous. Real could hurt you. Can I tell you something? The bravest thing you can do isn't avoiding pain. It's choosing to be vulnerable, even when you know it might hurt. Antonio just stood in front of the world and admitted his failures. Cheryl is watching the man who once let her go now fight for her publicly. And if you've ever had to decide whether to trust someone again after they hurt you, share this video with someone who needs to see it. Because sometimes people surprise us. Sometimes they grow. Sometimes second chances actually work. Keep watching, because what happens next will show you what real healing looks like. Antonio showed up at Cheryl's apartment at 11 p.m. She'd known he would come. The twins were asleep. The apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the sound of her own heartbeat. Cheryl opened the door before he could knock, not wanting the sound to wake the girls. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. "Yes, I did." They stood in the doorway, neither quite sure what came next. 17 years of history hanging between them like morning fog. "Come in," Cheryl finally said, but quietly. "The girls are sleeping." Antonio followed her inside. The apartment was small, smaller than his walk-in closet, probably, but it was clean, warm, filled with evidence of life actually lived. Drawings magnetized to the refrigerator, books stacked on every surface in precarious towers. A calendar covered in color-coded activities written in Cheryl's careful handwriting. This was where his daughters had grown up. In this space that Cheryl had made into a home through sheer force of will and love. They sat at the small kitchen table, the same table where 3 days ago they'd established boundaries. Cheryl made tea automatically, something to do with her hands, a ritual of hospitality her grandmother had taught her. "Thank you," she said quietly, wrapping her hands around her mug. "For the press conference. For defending us. I should have defended you 17 years ago. You were young. So were you. And you still chose courage." Cheryl looked down at her tea, steam rising in delicate curls. "It wasn't courage. It was survival. There's a difference." "Tell me about it," Antonio said, leaning forward. "Please. I need to understand what you went through. All of it. And maybe it was the late hour, or the exhaustion of carrying secrets for so long, or the way Antonio was looking at her like her words actually mattered for the first time in 17 years. But Cheryl started talking. She told him about the pregnancy, the terror, the nausea that lasted all day, not just mornings, the loneliness that felt like drowning. She told him about the birth, 36 hours of labor, with only a nurse holding her hand because she had no family, no partner, no one who cared if she lived or died. She told him about the first year surviving on 2 hours of sleep scattered across 24-hour shifts, working nights while a neighbor watched the twins, crying in bathroom stalls between customers because exhaustion and hopelessness felt infinite. She told him about the birthday parties she couldn't afford, the school supplies she bought with coins saved in jars hidden around the apartment, the times she skipped meals so the girls could eat, the medical bills she'd paid off one painful dollar at a time. She told him about the judgments, the looks from other mothers at school events, the questions about their father that felt like accusations, the assumptions about her character written on strangers' faces. She told him about the strength it took to wake up every single day and choose hope over bitterness, love over resentment, forward motion over collapse. And Antonio listened. Not with pity that would have insulted her. Not with guilt that demanded absolution. But with the kind of attention that made Cheryl feel truly heard for the first time in years. When she finally stopped talking, her tea had gone cold, and dawn was starting to lighten the sky outside her kitchen window. Antonio's eyes were red. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "God, Cheryl, I'm so sorry. Those words aren't enough. They'll never be enough, but I'm sorry for all of it. I know. If I could go back, but you can't." Cheryl's voice was gentle now, exhaustion softening her edges. None of us can. We can only choose what we do next. Antonio reached across the table slowly, telegraphing his movement, giving her time to refuse. She didn't. He took her hand carefully, like she might disappear if he held too tight, like she was something precious he'd already broken once. "What you did," he said quietly, "raising them alone, building this life out of nothing, Cheryl, that's not just survival, that's heroic. It's just what mothers do. No, it's what exceptional people do. Most people would have broken. You built something beautiful instead." Cheryl felt tears spill over, hot against her cold cheeks. "I should have been there," Antonio continued, his voice breaking. "I should have fought for you. I should have chosen you over everything else. You're choosing now. Is it too late?" The question hung between them, not just about the twins. About them. About 17 years of what-ifs and could-have-beens, and the kind of love that doesn't die just because time passes. Cheryl looked at their joined hands, her work-worn fingers against his manicured ones, the physical representation of the distance between their lives. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm not the same person I was at 23. That girl died the day she walked away from you. Neither am I. That scared kid is gone. And the girls have to come first. Always. No matter what. Always. Without question. And I won't be your consolation prize, Antonio. If you're still planning to marry Victoria, I'm not." Cheryl's breath caught. "What?" "I called off the wedding 3 days ago, right after I met the twins properly. Antonio, I told Victoria the truth, that I'd been in love with someone else for 17 years, that I'd found my daughters, that marrying her would be unfair to everyone involved." "What did she say?" "That she'd suspected as much, that I'd never looked at her the way I looked at you in that ballroom during rehearsal, that she deserved someone whose heart was fully available." Cheryl's hand trembled in his. "You looked at me for 10 seconds. I've been looking at you for 17 years, Cheryl, in every crowd, every face that turned a certain way in sunlight, every what-if that kept me awake at night. You've haunted me." The air between them felt electric, dangerous, full of possibilities that terrified them both. "I'm not asking for anything," Antonio said quietly. "I just need you to know you were never a phase. Never a mistake. Never anything less than the person I should have fought the world for." Cheryl's vision blurred completely. "Antonio, I know I don't deserve a second chance. I know I can't erase the past or fix what I broke. But if you'd let me, if you'd give me time, I'd like to prove I'm not that scared kid anymore." Cheryl pulled her hand back, but gently, not in anger. "I need time too, to figure out if I can trust this, if I can trust you. If I can trust myself not to repeat the same mistakes. That's fair. That's more than fair. And the girls, they're confused and overwhelmed, and processing a lot. I know. We go at their pace. So we take this slow, glacially slow. However slow you need. I've waited 17 years. I can wait however long it takes." They sat in silence for a moment, the early morning light painting the kitchen in shades of gold. Then Cheryl smiled, small, tentative, but real. "You've changed. You made me want to." And in that moment, sitting at a scarred kitchen table in a tiny apartment, Antonio understood something fundamental. Wealth had never made him rich. Success had never made him powerful. But this Cheryl's cautious trust, his daughter's shaky acceptance, the possibility of building something real from broken pieces, this was worth more than every billion-dollar deal he'd ever closed. "Thank you," he said softly, "for letting me try." Cheryl nodded. "Don't make me regret it." "I won't. That's a promise I intend to keep." Antonio stood to leave, aware that dawn was breaking and Cheryl needed rest. At the door, he paused. "Cheryl? Yeah? I meant what I said. At the press conference, about everything." She met his eyes, seeing past 17 years of hurt to the man standing in front of her now. "I know. That's why I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of believing you. Of letting the girls believe you. Of hoping this is real and having it fall apart again." Antonio stepped closer, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the sincerity radiating off him like heat. "It's real," he said. "I'm real. And I'm not going anywhere. You'll see. I'll prove it every single day until you believe it." After he left, Cheryl stood in her quiet apartment and let herself feel something dangerous. Hope. Not the desperate kind she'd clung to at 23, but the careful, cautious kind that comes with age and wisdom and the knowledge that second chances are rare and precious and worth protecting. Maybe, just maybe, worth the risk. The Grand Meridian Ballroom had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. But fairy tales, Cheryl had learned, often hide darkness beneath the beautiful surface. White roses cascaded from every surface in arrangements that probably cost more than her annual rent. Crystal chandeliers refracted light into rainbow patterns across silk-draped walls. 500 guests sat in pristine rows, dressed in their most expensive everything, waiting for a ceremony that had been called the event of the decade. Except the groom had called it off 3 days ago. Nobody seemed to know that yet. Cheryl stood in a side corridor, adjusting Rose's flower crown for the third time with shaking hands. "Mama, it's fine," Rose whispered, but she was smiling, patient with her mother's nervous energy. "I know, Cheryl's hands trembled slightly. "You both look so beautiful." And they did. Lila and Rose wore matching ivory dresses, simple but elegant, their dark curls styled with fresh flowers woven through. They looked like they belonged in this world of luxury and excess. That thought terrified Cheryl more than she wanted to admit, because belonging here meant being part of Antonio's world. And she'd been expelled from that world once already. "Are you nervous?" Lila asked, studying her mother's face with that perceptiveness that missed nothing. "A little." "Because of him? Because of Dad?" They'd started using the word tentatively, testing it out, seeing how it felt in their mouths. "Because this is complicated," Cheryl said honestly. "But you two? You're going to be perfect." The wedding coordinator appeared, clipboard in hand, expression professionally cheerful despite the chaos Cheryl suspected was happening behind the scenes. "Flower girls, you're up in 5 minutes. Let's get you into position." The twins hugged their mother quick, fierce embraces that said more than words, and followed the coordinator toward the ceremony entrance. Cheryl watched them go, her heart in her throat. She debated not coming at all. Staying home seemed safer, cleaner, less likely to end in disaster. But the twins had asked her to be there. And Antonio had texted that morning, "I need you there. Please. Whatever happens, I need you to see." So here she was, tucked into the back row where hopefully no one would notice her, wearing the same dress she'd worn to the rehearsal because it was the nicest thing she owned. The music changed. The ceremony was starting, and Cheryl had no idea she was about to witness something that would change everything. Antonio stood at the altar and felt like he was drowning. Victoria was supposed to be beautiful objectively, undeniably beautiful walking down that aisle in a dress that cost more than most people's cars. But she wasn't there. Because 3 days ago, he'd called off the wedding. And nobody except the immediate families knew. The guests didn't know. The vendors didn't know. The 500 people sitting in expensive clothes waiting for a ceremony didn't know. But they were about to find out. The music swelled. Guests turned expectantly. And his daughters walked down the aisle instead of the bride. Antonio's breath caught. They moved with careful grace, scattering rose petals, faces solemn with the weight of the moment. Lila caught his eye and smiled small, tentative, trusting. Rose's hand trembled slightly as she dropped petals, but her chin was lifted with determination. Pride crashed over Antonio with physical force. These were his children, his daughters, and they were here, in front of everyone, as part of his life. The twins reached the front and took their positions, looking confused about what came next. The processional music changed to the bridal march, but no bride appeared. Guests started murmuring. The music continued for an awkward 30 seconds, then stopped, and Antonio stepped forward to the microphone that was supposed to be for vows. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice carrying across the silent, confused ballroom. 500 faces stared at him. "There isn't going to be a wedding today. I know many of you are confused. Yes, I invited you all here, knowing I'd call this off. Because some truths need witnesses. And my mother's cruelty has hidden in shadows long enough." Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. "Victoria and I called it off 3 days ago. She's a remarkable woman who deserves someone whose heart is fully available. Mine isn't. It hasn't been for 17 years. The murmuring grew louder. Antonio continued, his voice steady. "I'm not going to waste your time with a ceremony that would have been a lie. But since you're all here, I am going to tell you the truth." He gestured to the twins standing beside him, confused and beautiful and brave. "These are my daughters, Lila and Rose. I only met them 2 weeks ago, but they've existed for 15 years, raised by their mother, Cheryl Johnson, who is the strongest person I've ever known." Cheryl, sitting in the back, went pale. "I failed them," Antonio continued. "I failed Cheryl. And I've spent the last 2 weeks learning what it means to actually show up for people instead of just building empires and making money." He looked directly at Cheryl across the distance. "I'm done living a life that looks successful but feels empty. I'm done making choices based on fear. I'm done being the person who lets the people he loves walk away." And that's when Megan Sellers stood up. "Stop this," Megan said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom with razor precision. "Stop this embarrassing display right now." Antonio's blood ran cold, but his voice stayed steady. "Mother, sit down." "No." Megan stepped into the aisle, blocking the view, commanding attention like she'd commanded rooms her entire life. "I've stayed silent while you've made increasingly poor decisions. But I will not stay silent while you ruin your reputation completely in front of 500 witnesses." 500 guests leaned forward. "This was better than any wedding." "Megan, someone from the front row," said carefully Victoria's mother, trying to maintain some dignity. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Everyone here deserves to know the truth," Megan interrupted, turning to address the crowd like a prosecutor making her case. "About who you're watching my son humiliate himself for." She pointed directly at Cheryl in the back row. "That woman, Cheryl Johnson, is a gold digger who got pregnant 15 years ago and hid it from Antonio specifically so she could trap him later when he was successful. Those children," she gestured at the twins, who'd gone pale and frozen, "are a manipulation, a calculated scheme, a plan executed perfectly to extort money from my son at the peak of his career." The ballroom erupted in whispers. Cheryl stood, shaking with rage, hands clenched at her sides. But before she could speak, Antonio moved. He stepped off the altar platform and walked directly toward his mother. Each step measured and deliberate. His voice was dangerously quiet, but the microphone caught every word. "That's enough. Antonio, everyone needs to understand what kind of woman." "I said that's enough." He stopped directly in front of her. "You're done. Your lies are done. Your manipulation is done." Megan's eyes flashed. "You're choosing her over your own family? Over your heritage? Over everything I've built for you? I'm choosing my daughters. I'm choosing the truth. And I'm choosing to finally be the man I should have been 17 years ago when you drove Cheryl away with threats and lies." Antonio turned to face the crowd, 500 of the city's most influential people, all staring, all judging, all waiting. "My mother is right about one thing," Antonio said, his voice carrying despite its quietness. "Cheryl Johnson did get pregnant 15 years ago, but she didn't hide it to trap me. She tried to tell me. My mother intercepted that communication, lied to both of us, and destroyed any chance we had at being a family." Megan's face went white as snow. "That's not. It is true, and I have proof: phone records, emails, testimony from the assistant you paid to keep Cheryl away from me. Should I have my lawyer present it now, in front of everyone?" The gasps were louder now, the whispers turning to shocked conversations. "Cheryl raised my daughters alone for 15 years, Antonio continued, his voice growing stronger. "She worked multiple jobs. She sacrificed everything. She never asked me for a single cent. Not because she was planning to trap me later, but because she has more integrity than most people in this room combined." He looked at his mother, and his next words were final as death. "You stole 15 years from me. 15 years of bedtime stories, and first steps, and school plays and moments I can never get back. And you did it because you cared more about social standing than about my happiness, about my life, about my children." Megan's voice shook. "I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself, your image, your control. And I'm done." Antonio's voice hardened to steel. "Any family that rejects my daughters is no family of mine." He stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear, but the microphone still catching every word. "You're disinherited from my life, completely. I don't want your money. I don't want your connections. I don't want anything that comes with strings attached to your cruelty. You'll regret this," Megan hissed, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "I'll cut you off. You'll lose everything." then I'll lose everything. But I'll have something you never understood, a family built on love instead of manipulation." Megan stared at him, realizing she'd lost, then turned and stormed out of the ballroom. Her assistant scrambled to follow. The door slammed with enough force to make the chandeliers tremble. Chaos erupted. Guests talking over each other. Some heading for exits. Others pulling out phones to capture this scandal. Wedding coordinators looking panicked. But then another voice cut through the noise. "Antonio." Victoria stood at the back of the ballroom, not in a wedding dress but in a simple, elegant suit, looking like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. She walked down the aisle with her head high, every eye following her. When she reached the altar, she took the microphone from Antonio gently. "Since everyone's here, and apparently we're doing truth-telling," she said with remarkable composure, "I should clarify something. Antonio and I called off this wedding 3 days ago, but Antonio insisted we gather everyone here anyway, not for a wedding, but for something more important, the truth, mutually. Because we both deserve to marry people we're actually in love with." She looked at him with genuine warmth. "Antonio is a good man, but his heart has belonged to someone else for 17 years, and I refuse to be anyone's second choice." Victoria turned to address the crowd. "So this wedding is officially cancelled. I apologize for the inconvenience, but I'd rather disappoint 500 people today than spend a lifetime in a marriage that was a beautiful lie." She handed the microphone back to Antonio, kissed his cheek, and walked down the aisle with her head held high. The room erupted again, but this time with something resembling respect mixed with the scandal. Antonio stood at the altar, Victoria gone, his mother gone, the wedding destroyed. And he looked across the ballroom to where Cheryl stood frozen in the back row. Their eyes met across the chaos, and Antonio saw his daughters still standing at the altar, confused and scared and unsure what came next. He dropped to his knees in front of them. "I'm so sorry you had to see that," he said, his voice breaking. "So sorry for all of it." "Is Grandma right?" Rose whispered, tears streaming. "Are we really?" "No, listen to me. She is wrong. About everything. You are not mistakes. You are not schemes. You are my daughters, and I love you, and nothing will change that." Lila's voice was small. "Even though she's your mom? She stopped being my family the moment she called you mistakes. You are my family now. You and your mother. That's it. That's all that matters." Cheryl appeared then, having pushed through the confused crowd, and immediately wrapped both girls in her arms. "We're leaving," she said firmly. "Right now." "Wait," Antonio said. "Please." Cheryl looked at him, this man who just destroyed his mother's influence, called off his wedding, and declared his daughters to a room full of the city's elite. "Come with me," Antonio said quietly. "All of you. There's a back exit. My car's waiting. Somewhere quiet where we can breathe and figure this out together." "Together?" Cheryl's voice cracked. "If you'll let me. If you'll trust me one more time." The twins looked at their mother, then at Antonio, then at each other. "Can we go?" Lila asked. "Please? I don't want to be here anymore," with everyone staring. Cheryl nodded, her own composure cracking. "Okay, yes, let's go." Antonio led them through a service corridor, away from cameras and chaos and the ruins of the wedding that was never meant to be. Behind them, 500 guests continued gossiping, their phones lighting up social media with the scandal. Megan's carefully constructed image crumbled as her cruelty was exposed. The Hartwell and Sellers family names would be trending for weeks. But Antonio didn't care about any of it. Because for the first time in his life, he was walking toward what mattered instead of away from it. His daughters on either side, holding his hands like anchors. Cheryl just ahead, looking back to make sure he was following, testing if he'd actually stay. And finally, Antonio understood what it meant to be rich. Not in money, not in power, but in the people who chose to trust you despite every reason not to. The wedding was a disaster. But maybe, just maybe, it was exactly the disaster they needed. Sometimes the life you planned has to completely fall apart before you can build the life you actually need. Antonio just walked away from everything, the wedding, his mother, his carefully constructed image for a family he only just met. That's what real change looks like. Messy, public, irreversible. If this story is hitting you in the heart, if you know someone who needs to hear about second chances and real courage, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Because we're almost to the ending, And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when people finally stop running from the truth. Comment below. Have you ever had to choose between what looks safe and what was actually right? I want to hear your stories. Antonio's penthouse felt different with children in it. The space that usually echoed with silence now carried the sound of tentative footsteps, whispered conversations between twins communicating in their secret language, and the kind of careful presence that comes from people who aren't sure they belong yet but desperately want to. The twins sat on the leather couch, still wearing their flower girl dresses, looking small in the massive living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking a city that suddenly felt very far away. Cheryl stood by those windows, arms crossed, staring at lights below while processing everything that had just happened. Antonio had ordered pizza, which felt absurd given the afternoon's events, but normal felt like the only thing worth reaching for. The most expensive pizzas in the city, delivered to a billionaire's penthouse, eaten by two confused teenagers and their exhausted mother. "You have a nice view," Rose said quietly, breaking the silence that had settled over them like snow. "Thank you," Antonio replied, sitting across from them. "But it's a lonely view. Beautiful things usually are when you experience them alone." Lila studied him with those bronze eyes that cut too deep, saw too much. "Are you sad about the wedding?" Antonio looked at her, really looked at her, and decided 15 years of lies was enough. "No, I'm sad I almost made a huge mistake. I'm sad your grandmother said those terrible things. But the wedding itself? That needed to end. It was never right. Because of us?" Rose's voice was small, and it broke Antonio's heart. "Because of me. Because I was about to marry someone I didn't love to make everyone else happy. That's not fair to anyone, not to Victoria, not to me, and especially not to you." The twins exchanged glances in that way they had. "Can we ask you something?" Lila said. "Anything. Always. Are you going to leave?" The question landed like a physical blow, stealing Antonio's breath. "What makes you think I'd leave?" "Everyone leaves eventually," Rose whispered, and the resignation in her voice made Antonio want to find everyone who'd ever disappointed these girls and make them answer for it. Or they stay, but they're not really there. Or they promise things they don't mean. "Who taught you that?" "Life," Lila said simply, her voice older than her years. "We've watched kids at school whose dads promise to come to recitals and don't show up. Whose parents say they'll do things and then forget. Mama never forgets. She always shows up, but other people." She trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy. "Other people aren't Mama." Antonio felt like his heart was being crushed in a vice. These girls, his girls, had learned not to trust promises because the world had taught them promises were just pretty lies. "Come here," he said softly. The twins hesitated. Then Rose stood first, always the braver one in matters of emotion, and Lila followed because they did everything together. They sat on either side of him on the couch, close but not quite touching, waiting to be disappointed again. Antonio took a breath. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. Can you do that?" They nodded, eyes wide. "I'm not leaving. Not tomorrow, not next week, not when things get hard or inconvenient or complicated. I'm staying. Forever." "You can't promise forever," Lila said, but her voice cracked with the weight of wanting to believe. "Nobody can." "You're right. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes. I can't promise I won't mess up, or say the wrong thing, or disappoint you sometimes. But I can promise this: I will show up. Every single time. For every recital, every parent-teacher conference, every moment you need me. Even the small moments. Especially the small moments." "Why?" Rose asked, tears spilling over. "Why would you do that? You have your company and your money, and all these important things. None of that matters more than you." The words hung in the air. Lila's jaw trembled, tears streaming, but her voice steady in that fierce way she had. "People always say that, but they don't mean it. They say family is important, and then miss dinner for work calls. They say they'll be there, and then cancel because something came up. Then let me prove I mean it." Antonio pulled both girls into a hug, gentle, careful, giving them space to pull away if they needed to. They didn't pull away. Rose buried her face in his shoulder and started crying, really crying. The kind of tears that come from places too deep for words. Years of wondering why they weren't enough for a father to stay. Lila held on tighter, her whole body shaking with sobs she'd probably been holding in for 15 years. "We were so scared," Rose whispered against his chest, "when Grandma said those things. When everyone was staring, we thought you'd realize we were too much trouble, that you'd regret claiming us." "Never," Antonio said fiercely, his own voice breaking. "Do you hear me? Never. You are not too much. You are not mistakes. You are not complications. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you." "Even if we mess up?" Lila asked, her voice muffled against his other shoulder. "Especially when you mess up, that's when you need a father most. To tell you it's okay, to help you fix it, to love you anyway." Something shifted in Lila's expression, a crack in the armor she'd built to protect herself, a glimpse of the little girl beneath the fierce protector. "Can we?" Her voice was barely audible. "Can we really call you Dad?" Antonio's vision blurred completely. Tears he'd been fighting finally falling. "I would be honored beyond words." Rose sniffled, pulling back just enough to look at him with those bronze eyes that mirrored his own. "Even in public? Even when people are watching?" "Especially in public. I want the whole world to know you're mine, that I'm yours, that we're family." The twins looked at each other with wet faces and trembling smiles. Then, almost shyly, Lila whispered, "Okay, Dad." And Rose, even quieter, "Okay, Dad." Antonio held them both. And for the first time in weeks, maybe years, maybe his entire life, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Across the room, Cheryl watched with tears streaming down her face, one hand covering her mouth to muffle the sobs. And she finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, some men actually keep their promises. Later, after the twins had fallen asleep in one of the guest bedrooms, exhausted from emotion and ceremony and upheaval, Antonio found Cheryl still standing by the windows. She'd been crying. He could tell from the way she held herself, the slight tremor in her shoulders, the tissue clutched in one hand. "They're asleep," Antonio said softly, not wanting to startle her. Cheryl nodded but didn't turn around. "Thank you for today, for defending us, for," her voice broke, "for choosing them." Antonio stepped closer, but not too close, respecting the space she needed. "I should have chosen you 17 years ago. We can't change the past." "No, but we can choose what happens next." Cheryl finally turned to face him, and Antonio saw her face was wet with tears, her eyes red but steady. "What do you want to happen next, Antonio?" The question was loaded with 17 years of history, pain, broken promises, and the kind of complicated feelings that didn't have simple answers. "I want to be a father to Lila and Rose. I want to show up every day and earn their trust. I want to prove that some men actually keep their promises. I want to make up for 15 years of absence." "And what else?" Her voice was quiet but direct. Antonio swallowed hard. "I want another chance with you." Cheryl's breath caught audibly. "Antonio, I know I don't deserve it. I know I hurt you in ways I can't fix. I know trusting me again is terrifying and maybe impossible. But Cheryl, I never stopped. Don't." Her voice was sharp, protective. "Don't tell me you never stopped loving me. Don't make this about some grand romantic gesture where words fix everything, because I need more than words. I've always needed more than words." "What do you need?" Cheryl's hands trembled as she wrapped her arms around herself. "I need to know you won't disappear when things get hard. I need to know you won't choose your career, or your reputation, or your mother's approval over us again. I need to know that this," she gestured between them, encompassing everything, "isn't just guilt or nostalgia or some crisis making you sentimental." Antonio closed the distance between them carefully, like approaching something wild and precious that might bolt. "It's not guilt. It's not nostalgia. It's the fact that for almost 17 years, I've been half alive. Building empires that don't matter. Making money that brings no joy. Dating people I can't love because they're not you." Pretty words. "Then let me prove I'm worth the risk." Cheryl looked up at him, and Antonio saw the war happening behind her eyes, hope battling fear, desire fighting caution, love wrestling with self-protection. "How?" she whispered. "However you need me to. For however long it takes. Set the terms. Tell me what you need. I'll do it." "What about your company? Your board? Your entire life?" Antonio pulled his phone from his pocket. Right there, standing in front of Cheryl, with his heart in his throat, he typed an email. Then he showed her the screen. 2. Board of Directors, Sellers, Global Tech. Effective immediately. I am stepping back from my role as CEO. I will transition to chairman, working remotely and part-time. My priority is no longer building the company, it's building my family. This is non-negotiable. Antonio Sellers. Cheryl's eyes widened in shock, her hand flying to her mouth. You can't. I already did. Antonio hit send while she watched, the email disappearing into the digital void. The message just went out. Antonio, that's your entire life. No. My daughters are my life. You are my life. The company is just a company. Buildings and profit margins and quarterly reports that won't matter when I'm on my deathbed wondering why I wasted my time. Cheryl stared at him, tears streaming down her face now, her whole body trembling. You're serious. Completely serious. They'll fight you. The board, the investors, the shareholders. Let them fight. I own controlling interest. They can complain all they want, but they can't stop me. And I don't care what they think. You built that company from nothing. And I'll build something better now. A family, a real one. The kind where I show up for breakfast and help with homework, and don't miss birthdays because of meetings that could have been emails. Cheryl's hands covered her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief, and something that looked dangerously like hope. I don't know what to say. Say you'll give me a chance. Not now, I know you need time to trust this, to trust me. But someday, when you're ready, when I've proven I'm not the scared kid who let you walk away. Cheryl looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't seen 17 years ago. Not potential, not promise, but actual, tangible, irreversible change. I still have feelings for you, she admitted, her voice breaking on the words. I never stopped. I tried. God knows I tried. But I'm terrified, Antonio. I'm terrified of believing in this and having it fall apart. Of letting the girls believe in this and watching them get hurt. Then we'll go slow. As slow as you need, glacially slow. I'm not going anywhere. Cheryl laughed through her tears, the sound wet and broken and beautiful. You just quit your job for me. I stepped back from my job for our family. There's a difference. I'll still work, just differently. But the girls and you come first. Always. No exceptions. She shook her head, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd just done. This is insane. Probably. But the sanest thing I've done in 17 years was finally choosing you, choosing them, choosing this. Antonio reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, giving her every opportunity to refuse. She didn't. He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the gesture achingly gentle. I'm going to prove it, Cheryl, every single day. I'm going to show you that some people actually keep their promises. That some love is worth fighting for. That, Cheryl kissed him. Not tentatively. Not carefully. But with 17 years of longing and pain and hope crashing together in a single moment of surrender. Antonio froze for a heartbeat, shocked, terrified of moving wrong, of breaking this fragile magic. Then he kissed her back. Gentle but certain. Familiar but new. Everything they'd lost, and everything they could still become. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cheryl rested her forehead against his. Don't make me regret this, she whispered. I won't. I swear on everything that matters, I won't. And the girls come first, always, no matter what happens between us. Always, without question. That's not negotiable. Cheryl pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, searching for the lie, the catch, the inevitable disappointment. If we try this, if we really try, it's on my terms. Slow, careful, with boundaries and honesty, and therapy, because we have 17 years of baggage to work through. Any terms that keep us together, Antonio interrupted gently, are terms I accept. Cheryl smiled, small, cautious, but real and bright as sunrise. Okay then. Okay? Okay, we try. Slowly, one day at a time. Antonio felt like his heart might burst from his chest. I can do slow. Can you? Because you just upended your entire life in about 30 seconds. For you and the girls, I can do anything. I can be patient. I can be whatever you need. Cheryl kissed him again, softer this time, testing, exploring the possibility of hope after years of protecting herself from it. When they finally separated, she whispered, Don't disappoint me. I won't. Don't disappoint them. Never. That's the promise I'll die keeping. And Antonio? Yeah? Thank you. For today. For all of it. For finally being the man I always believed you could be. Antonio pulled her close, resting his chin on her head, feeling 17 years of mistakes, finally giving way to something that looked like redemption. Through the window, the city glittered below, cold, distant, beautiful, but lonely. But here, in this moment, with Cheryl in his arms and his daughters sleeping in the next room, Antonio finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy. Not in money, not in power, but in the people who chose to trust you despite every reason not to. In the family you fought to deserve. In the love you'd lost, and somehow, miraculously, impossibly found again. 3 months later, Antonio Sellers stood in Cheryl's kitchen at 6:30 a.m., staring at a box of pancake mix like it contained instructions for nuclear fusion. The ratio is on the back, Cheryl said from the doorway, hair still damp from the shower, coffee mug in hand, wearing one of his old t-shirts that he'd accidentally left at her apartment. I'm reading it. It doesn't make sense. It says 1 cup of mix to 3/4 cup of milk. It's literally printed right there. That seems like too much milk. Antonio, you've negotiated billion-dollar mergers. You revolutionized 3 industries. You can handle pancakes. He looked at her, helpless in a way that made her heart warm. Can I though? Cheryl laughed, the sound lighter now. Easier, like something that had been wound too tight for years, was finally loosening. Add the milk slowly. If it's too thick, add more. If it's too thin, add mix. It's not rocket science. She kissed his cheek and headed toward the twins' bedroom to wake them for school. Antonio returned to the pancake mix with renewed determination. This was his life now. Not board meetings at dawn. Not private jets to investor conferences. Not power lunches where fortunes changed hands over appetizers that cost more than groceries. This, pancakes that would probably be terrible. School lunches that needed packing. Permission slips that needed signing. Morning chaos and coffee spills, and the beautiful mundane reality of family life. And he'd never been happier in his entire life. The transition hadn't been seamless. The board had fought his decision to step back, threats, ultimatums, attempts to call emergency votes to remove him. Antonio had reminded them he owned 52% of the company and that the discussion was over. Some investors pulled out, spooked by the instability. The stock price dipped 12% in the first week. Financial magazines wrote think pieces about the CEO who chose family over empire with thinly veiled criticism. Antonio didn't care. Because 3 mornings a week, he walked his daughters to the bus stop, listening to them talk about school drama and art projects and the science of pollination. Because he'd attended 6 school events in 3 months, more than most fathers managed in a year. Because Lila had started showing him her sketches without being asked, trusting him with the creative pieces of herself she usually guarded fiercely. Because Rose had texted him a picture of a bee she'd found in the community garden, with the caption, "Thought you'd want to see this," named her Beatrice. Because last week, when Cheryl had gotten sick with the flu, both girls had called him first, trusting him to know what to do. These were the returns that mattered, the investments that actually paid dividends, the wealth that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. Dad! Rose appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for school, backpack slung over one shoulder. Can you help me with my science project after school? Dad. The word still hit Antonio like a gift every single time, warming him from the inside. Absolutely. What's the project? Ecosystem in a jar. I need to balance plants and tiny organisms so they sustain each other without outside intervention. That sounds incredible. We'll work on it together. What time do you need me? 4, after Mama gets home from work? I'll be there, with supplies. What do we need? Rose's face lit up with that smile that made Antonio's chest tight. Really? You'll help? Rose, I will always help. You never have to doubt that. Lila emerged next, her hair in a messy bun, wearing paint-stained jeans and an oversized hoodie. Morning, she mumbled, heading straight for the coffee pot. You're 15, Antonio said automatically, the dad reflex he developed over 3 months. You don't need coffee. I'm artistic, and it's Monday. We run on caffeine and emotional turbulence. You're getting orange juice. Lila groaned dramatically, but accepted the glass he poured, and Antonio caught her hiding a smile. Cheryl returned, watching the scene with an expression that made Antonio's heart skip, contentment mixed with cautious joy, like she was still testing if this was real. How's it going? Chef? I think I'm making cement. Let me see. She peered into the bowl and tried not to laugh at the thick, paste-like substance he'd created. That's very thick. Add more milk. How much more? Start with half a cup and see what happens. Antonio added milk, whisked furiously, and produced something that looked marginally more like actual pancake batter. Better? He asked hopefully. Better. Though the bar was low, the first pancake hit the griddle and immediately began smoking ominously. Is it supposed to do that? Antonio asked, alarmed. The heat's too high, Cheryl said, adjusting the dial with practiced ease. Lower and slower. That's literally the opposite of how I've run my entire life. Welcome to parenting. Also relationships. Also basically everything that actually matters. Breakfast was chaotic in the best way. Antonio's pancakes were misshapen and slightly burned on the edges, but the twins ate them without complaint. Lila even claimed they had rustic charm and represented the imperfection inherent in human endeavor. They're just burned, Lila, Rose said. Art is interpretation. They're pancakes. Burned pancakes are a commentary on... Girls, Cheryl interrupted gently, eat your breakfast. Antonio watched this, watched Cheryl help Rose organize her backpack, watched Lila steal an extra piece of bacon when she thought no one was looking, watched the ordinary magic of a family morning, and he thought about the board meeting he was missing right now. The quarterly report he wasn't reviewing. The conference call with Tokyo investors that his new CFO was handling instead. None of it mattered. Not compared to this. After the twins left for school, after hugs and love yous and reminders about their after-school schedules, the apartment fell into a comfortable quiet. Cheryl started clearing dishes. Antonio helped without being asked, falling into the rhythm they developed over 3 months of mornings like this. I have something I want to talk to you about, he said carefully, drying a plate. Cheryl's hands stilled in the soapy water. That sounds serious. It's not bad, I promise. Just important. They sat at the small kitchen table, the same table where everything had started to change months ago. What's on your mind? Cheryl asked, coffee mug cradled between her hands. Antonio pulled out his phone, opened a document, and slid it across to her with hands that trembled slightly. Cheryl read the heading, Petition for Legal Name Addition. Her breath caught audibly. The twins asked me about this last week, Antonio explained quietly. About whether they could add my last name to theirs. Not replace Johnson, they were very clear about that. They want to keep your name, but Sellers Johnson, hyphenated. Cheryl's vision blurred instantly, tears spilling before she could stop them. They asked you? They wanted my permission before asking yours, they said. His voice cracked with emotion. They said they wanted the world to know they belonged to both of us. Cheryl covered her mouth with one hand, the other gripping the edge of the table. What did you tell them? That I would be honored beyond words. That carrying my name would make me prouder than any business achievement, any award, any recognition I've ever received. And that we'd talk to you together. Because you're their mother, and your opinion matters most. Cheryl read through the document with tears streaming down her face, seeing her daughter's names, with Antonio's added. Lila Rose Sellers Johnson. Rose Marie Sellers Johnson. They really want this? She whispered. They really do. But only if you're comfortable with it. This is your decision, Cheryl. She thought about all the years she'd carried their last name alone, Johnson, her family name, her grandmother's name, the only thing she'd had to give them when they were born with nothing but her love and determination. Adding Sellers felt like sharing something she'd protected fiercely for 15 years. But sharing felt right now. Felt like healing. Felt like family becoming whole. Yes, she whispered, then stronger. Yes. If they want it, absolutely yes. Antonio reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing gently. Thank you. For letting me be part of this. For letting me be their father. You've earned it. Every single day for 3 months, you've earned it. Have I earned something else? Cheryl looked up, meeting his eyes with a mixture of curiosity and caution. What? You, us. Moving forward instead of just taking things slow. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Antonio, I know we said slow. And we have been. But Cheryl, these last 3 months have been the best of my life. Waking up and knowing I get to see you. Making terrible pancakes while you laugh at me. Watching the twins realize they can trust me. Building something real together. He squeezed her hand gently. I don't want slow anymore. I want forever. I want messy mornings and homework help and family dinners. I want the life we should have had 17 years ago. And I want to ask you properly. Cheryl's breath caught as Antonio stood, pulled a small box from his pocket with shaking hands, and dropped to one knee in her tiny kitchen. Cheryl Johnson, I wasted 17 years being a coward. I let you walk away once because I was too scared to fight for what mattered. I chose fear over love. And I lost everything that was real. His voice shook but held steady, carrying the weight of every moment that had led them here. But you gave me a second chance I didn't deserve. You let me prove I could change. You trusted me with our daughters when you had every reason not to. And now I'm asking, begging, really, for you to trust me with your heart. He opened the box. The ring inside was simple, elegant, but not ostentatious. A single stone that caught the morning light. Beautiful, but not showy. Perfect. Marry me. Not because it's expected, not because it makes sense on paper, but because I love you. Because I've loved you since we were kids, with impossible dreams. Because you're the strongest person I've ever known. Because life without you isn't life, it's just existence. Cheryl was crying openly now, both hands covering her mouth. I'm terrified, she whispered. I know. The past hurts so much. Being left hurts so much. I know. And I can't erase that pain. But I can promise you, swear to you that the present is real, and the future is ours to choose. Cheryl looked at the ring, at Antonio's face, at the life they'd somehow managed to rebuild from ruins and heartbreak. If I say yes, anything, name your terms, all of them. We go to therapy, both of us, together. Because we have 17 years of baggage and 3 months of rebuilding doesn't magically fix that. Done. I'll call someone today. You keep prioritizing the girls. Always. Even after we're married. Always. That's not negotiable. They come first. And you teach me how to trust this. How to believe in happy endings. Because Antonio, I forgot how. I forgot how to hope for good things. Antonio's eyes shone with unshed tears. I'll spend every day reminding you. Every single day until you believe it in your bones. Cheryl took a shaking breath, her whole body trembling with the magnitude of this moment. Then yes, God help me, yes. Antonio slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her, and stood, pulling her into his arms. They kissed deep, certain, carrying the weight of everything they'd survived and everything they'd become. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cheryl whispered, "The girls are going to lose their minds." Good minds losing, or bad minds losing? Definitely good. They've been asking when you were going to make it official for the past month. They have? They're 15, they're not subtle. Antonio laughed, the sound bright and free. I love them so much. I know. That's why I said yes. Here's what I want you to understand about this story. It's not just about Antonio and Cheryl. It's about every single person who thought their chance at happiness was gone forever. It's about the mothers raising children alone who think no one sees their sacrifice. It's about the people who made terrible mistakes and wonder if redemption is possible. It's about choosing courage over comfort. It's about showing up every single day, even when it's hard. If this story touched your heart, if you see yourself or someone you love in these characters, do 3 things for me. Hit that like button so more people can find this story. Subscribe and turn on notifications because I share stories like this every week. Real stories about real people choosing love over fear. And most importantly, share this. Share it with someone who needs to know that second chances exist, that people can change, that it's never too late to choose differently. Comment below and tell me, what's the bravest choice you've ever made? I read every single comment. Because your story matters. Just like Cheryl's story matters. Just like Antonio's story matters. And together, we're building a community that believes in second chances, and real love, and families that fight to stay whole. Thank you for being here. That afternoon, they picked up the twins from school together. Antonio had started doing this regularly, showing up, being present, proving with actions instead of words. Lila noticed the ring immediately. Mom. Is that? Rose grabbed Cheryl's hand, eyes enormous. Did he? Did you? Cheryl nodded, tears already starting again because apparently that's what she did now, cried at everything beautiful. The twins screamed. Actually screamed in the middle of the school parking lot, jumping up and down, hugging each other and their mother and Antonio, in a chaotic tangle of joy and limbs and laughter. "Does this mean we're a real family?" Rose asked breathlessly when they finally calmed down. "We've always been a real family," Cheryl said firmly. "But yes. Now it's official." "Can we plan the wedding?" Lila asked, practically vibrating with excitement. "Please? We have so many ideas." "So many ideas," Rose added, with an intensity that was slightly alarming. Antonio laughed, overwhelmed in the best way. "Whatever you want." "Anything?" Lila's eyes gleamed dangerously. "Within reason," Cheryl qualified quickly. "Anything reasonable," Antonio agreed. The twins exchanged glances and grinned identical mischievous expressions that Antonio recognized as absolutely coming from his genetic contribution. "We're going to plan the best wedding ever," Lila declared. "With an actual ecosystem theme," Rose added seriously. "Living plants, pollinator stations, the whole thing." "What?" Cheryl laughed, surprised. "You'll see," the twins said in perfect unison, their twin connection stronger than ever. "It's going to be amazing." 6 months later, on a perfect spring afternoon that felt like the universe finally cooperating, Antonio and Cheryl got married in the community garden where Rose had fallen in love with plants and possibility. It wasn't elaborate. No 500-person guest list. No designer everything. No pretense or performance. Just close friends. A handful of family members who'd proven themselves worthy of being called family. And 2 teenage girls in matching dresses, serving as maids of honor, with flowers in their hair. The decorations were plants the twins had grown themselves over 6 months, imperfect, abundant, beautiful, alive with bees that Rose had specifically cultivated. When Cheryl walked down the aisle, she wore a simple dress she'd chosen herself, her daughters on either side of her, all 3 of them crying and laughing simultaneously. Antonio cried the moment he saw them. Not from guilt, not from nostalgia, but from pure, uncomplicated joy. The vows were personal, raw, honest, acknowledging the past without being trapped by it, celebrating the present, promising the future they'd choose together. "I promise to show up," Antonio said, his voice carrying across the garden. "Every single day, for pancakes and homework and the boring, beautiful moments that make life real." "I promise to let you," Cheryl replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "To trust you. To believe that love can survive mistakes and time and distance." "I promise to be worthy of that trust," Antonio continued. "To earn it every day. To never take it for granted." "I promise to build this life with you," Cheryl said. "Not the life we planned at 23, but something better, something real." And when the officiant said, "You may kiss your bride," Antonio and Cheryl kissed like people who'd earned their happy ending through pain and patience and choosing each other every single day. The reception was held in Cheryl's apartment, now their apartment. Boxes of Antonio's things still half unpacked in corners because they'd been too busy living to finish organizing. Cramped and chaotic and absolutely perfect. At one point, Antonio found himself standing in a corner, watching Cheryl laugh with friends, while the twins showed off pictures of their newly hyphenated names on their school IDs with pride. Lila Rose Sellers Johnson. Rose Marie Sellers Johnson. His daughters. His wife, his family, his life. "You look happy," a voice said. Antonio turned to find his former CFO, Marcus, one of the few board members who'd supported his decision to step back. "I am happy. Happier than I knew was possible." "Even though you're not running the company anymore?" Antonio smiled, watching Rose explain her ecosystem project to a captivated group of adults. "The company is thriving without me micromanaging. Turns out delegation works. But this," he gestured, to the crowded apartment, the laughter, the love. "This is everything I never knew I was building toward. No regrets? Not one. Best decision I ever made was finally putting family first." Late that night, after the guests had left and the twins were finally asleep after an exhausting day, Antonio and Cheryl stood on the tiny balcony under a sky full of stars. "We did it," Cheryl whispered, leaning back against Antonio's chest. "We actually did it." "Did what?" "Built something real, from all the broken pieces." Antonio wrapped his arms around her, his chin resting on her head. "You built it. I just finally showed up." "You've done more than show up. You've proven that change is possible. That second chances work. That people can choose differently. We chose differently. Together. They stood in comfortable silence, feeling the weight of everything they'd survived, everything they'd built, everything they'd become. No regrets? Cheryl asked softly. Not one. Not even about the company. Not even about the money you lost in stock value when you stepped back? Especially not about that. I'm richer now than I ever was as CEO. She tilted her head up to look at him, moonlight painting her face silver. How do you figure? Because I have you. I have the girls. I have Sunday mornings making terrible pancakes and Tuesday evenings helping with homework and ordinary beautiful moments I would have missed if I'd stayed on the path I was on. Cheryl turned in his arms to face him fully. I'm proud of you for choosing this, for being brave enough to change. I'm proud of you for giving me the chance, for trusting me when you had every reason not to. They kissed soft, sweet, certain. A promise kept. A family whole. A love that had survived time and pain and finally found its way home. From inside the apartment, they heard movement. The bedroom door opened quietly. Two sleepy voices called out, "Mom? Dad? Are you still up?" Antonio and Cheryl exchanged glances and smiled. "We're here," Cheryl called back softly. "Always here." The twins appeared on the balcony in their pajamas, still half asleep, and without a word pressed themselves into the space between their parents. The four of them stood there, Cheryl and Antonio with their daughters between them, a family unit finally, impossibly, beautifully complete. "I love you guys," Rose mumbled sleepily. "Love you too," Lila added through a yawn. "We love you both," Antonio and Cheryl said together, their voices overlapping. Antonio looked at Cheryl over their daughters' heads. She looked back, her eyes shining with tears and joy and hope. No words needed. Just the understanding that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you have to fight for, the ones that break you first, the ones that require courage and patience, and the willingness to believe in second chances. Below them, the city continued its relentless pace, people chasing success, building empires, measuring worth in zeros and status, and things that don't matter when you're dying. But here, on a cramped balcony in a modest apartment, with a family pressed close under the stars, Antonio Sellers had found something more valuable than all the wealth he'd ever accumulated. A family who chose him, a woman who trusted him, daughters who called him dad without hesitation, and a life that mattered. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And that was worth everything. Sometimes the family you build is better than the one you planned. Sometimes the person who hurts you becomes the one who heals you. Sometimes it takes losing everything to find what actually matters. Antonio and Cheryl's story isn't just about second chances, it's about the courage to take them, to trust again, to hope again, to believe that people can change and love can survive and families can heal. If their story touched your heart, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. Because stories like this remind us that we're all capable of choosing differently, of being brave, of showing up, of building something beautiful from broken pieces. Thank you for being here. Until next time, choose courage, choose love, choose to show up.